Good morning, and welcome to the inaugural edition of the MBN Iran briefing, the podcast version. With me today are Leila Bazi, the editor-in-chief of Middle East Broadcasting Networks, and Matthew Kaminsky, the editorial chair of MBN. And I'm Andres Ilves, the Iran editor for MBN, which focuses on the Arab world in Arabic, but also covers all the relevant issues that affect our audience.
Happy birthday, Andres! Just an important fact that I want to break in to acknowledge.
Thank you. There is that. But you and our audiences in Iran are never far from my mind, even on my birthday, and it's a pleasure to spend it with you. And so we're dialing in from different cities. Matt, in fact, is on a different continent, and Leila and I are in different cities in the U.S. But as I said, we're thinking about Iran. Iran is on our minds. And let me kick off with this. We just got a notification. AP is reporting that the, shall I say, alleged new supreme leader, the ultimate Nepo baby, Mujtaba Khamenei, has apparently announced that they are going to go after shipping in the Straits of Hormuz. Now, just to bear in mind that this is the first time we've heard anything from him, but it's not even from him. They didn't have his voice. It was read by somebody else, an announcer on Iranian TV. But nonetheless, this is his first purported statement. So interesting that now, days after he was chosen, this is the first time he's weighing in. That's how important the Straits of Hormuz are. What do you think?
Yes.
What's up? Why is he weighing in on the Straits of Hormuz? You tell me, Leila, what's going on?
Let me tell you before we go into details about the Strait of Hormuz and the impact economically on the Gulf and on the region and all the world. Let me give you latest updates related to what the alleged supreme leader said today. So he issued his first major directive since taking the power. And as you said, he made it very clear that the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed, framing it as the strategic tool as the conflict. And he also warned, again, even though they are doing the action, he warned Gulf countries to shut down U.S. military bases on their territory and promised continued retaliation. Having said that, they continued their wave of strike across the region. The last hours, you have incidents in Dubai, drone attacks near Kuwait airport, targeting fuel tanks in Oman of Salha, a drone intercepted in oil fields in Saudi Arabia. There is a hit on U.S. Iraq base in northern Iraq. So they are already carrying on their threats. So the message is so clear from Tehran. The war is no longer limited to Iran and Israel. It's spreading pressure across the Gulf. This is the recent update for the last few hours. This is what we've been discussing in our newsroom today.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's very clear that, whether he is alive or not, whether we see him or hear his voice one of these or not, the IRGC is running Iran, and he is their guy, but it's in fact the hard men in military uniforms that are in charge. I mean, the most immediate thing that comes to mind for me is that, the enemy gets a vote. And, the U.S. and the Israeli air campaign has been a textbook example of, especially the first hours of how to do this. They wiped out almost 50 of the top leaders of Iran, really neutralized Iran's capacity to fight this war in any conventional way. But again, the enemy gets a vote, and the enemy is voting with, we're going to go asymmetrical. We're going to go all out. We're, in previous military kinetic engagement with Iran, they told you where they were going to strike. It was very limited. They didn't want to escalate. This regime is now fighting for its life, and it is acting like it. And I think this is one of the bigger surprises for me of the last 2 weeks.
Well, it's funny you should say that, Matt, fighting for its life, because it's true. Sometimes countries go to war and it doesn't necessarily take a toll on the leaders initially. The focus is on the struggle. But, we look at the leaders in the Gulf. We look at the leaders, frankly, of Israel and the U.S. And this whole war is it's become the number one issue for, a dozen or 24 countries. It's inescapable. And if you think about the headlines just a few weeks ago, they were about different topics. They were about Ukraine, stuff goes on elsewhere in the world. This is now the only
Everybody
topic.
forgets about Gaza. Everybody forgets about
Exactly.
Gaza. Yes.
Who's talking about
Yes.
Gaza? Where are the plans? Where are and the news goes on. That's the other thing. Things may be happening, but it's so far down in the headlines that there's no way to even notice it. So, uh, what's at stake? What's at stake for the
Well,
Prime Minister of Israel?
no, but I think it's really worth dwelling on this regionalization point around what is happening. They've regionalized, but they've also internationalized this conflict, and we should have known from Iraq that just because you have military superiority doesn't mean you have control over events. And oil is going to spike again. It's been bouncing up and down between 80 and 120. It was just over 100 this morning. I haven't
It's
seen
a
the
hundred,
last
yeah.
10 minutes, but I'm sure it's going to spike up. The implications for but then internationally, this is going to sort of chill on on the global economy. So I think there is a strategy that is coming out of Tehran, and the question really for me is, used to say that Donald Trump left himself multiple off ramps because he wasn't clear exactly about what the end point here is. But and to the question, how does this tell me how this ends? I think that actually the harder question now is, tell me who gets to end it. Even if suddenly we say, we meaning the U.S. and
Yes.
and the West have achieved our strategic objectives in Iran, does that mean the IRGC will not keep up the pressure on the Gulf, will not sort of play spoiler, will not sort of close the the Strait of Hormuz as they can going forward? And I think this was what I would imagine makes people pretty anxious now in the White House, but also in capitals across the world.
The scenarios are so open, Matt. Like we heard yesterday, President Trump talking about that this is what Steve told him, this is what Jared told him. So as if he's trying to say that he did not have the full picture, because as you said, the surprising part is how Iran is still keep going and they are, yes, fighting for their lives. But Iran is a very big country and they've been preparing for themselves for 20 years. And they do have a lot of weapons, missiles. So, and allegedly they do have the intelligence of the Russian as well. So the scenario is really with many possible outcomes. The first possibility is like President Trump might decide and say, oh, okay, we have achieved the goal and announce victory. He could say tomorrow we declared victory. Why? Because we have killed this and that. We destroyed this and that, like what happened in the 12 days before. But Iran has to comply because would they stop hitting back? So it's a different, it's not like someone is going to control the narrative now. Before the US and Israel control the narrative, now nobody is controlling the narrative. So
this is a war. It's been going on for decades in a way. This is just the same war that's taken on a new level. And of course, as long as there's an Islamic Republic, as long as that state exists, there's going to be an IRGC. And now there's no incentive for them ever to stop. It's true. This could really be something that goes on a low level. And they've been at war because they've been fighting a different war through proxies. And now it's out in the open. So does this mean it's just going to be war?
Yeah,
Lives?
I would just think it's maybe important to get into the minds of the key actors. And now maybe, Andres, you've been thinking about Iran for over 40 years. Try and again, we assume that it's the international, sort of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is in charge. We don't quite even know who, because the sort of the top generals were killed on day one. Get in their heads and tell us sort of where you think they are right now. Like, what are they thinking? And then we'll get to Bibi and Trump, who are the other two key players.
Well, the thing for them, how much of any of what they do, how much of it is ideology and how much of it is just trying to save their skins? This is one of those situations where they've set up basically this state where a small group of people get to make a lot of money by controlling a whole bunch of strategic industries. They're not going to give that up. And as we've seen from other places where there is a successful revolution, the people who were in charge before don't always end up very well. So this is truly something where they will, under no circumstances, yield power. And so if I were to get into their heads, I think it's kind of somewhere between a bunker mentality and perhaps feeling their oaths as well, because it's not so clear, as you said, that they're doing that badly. They sure have a big stockpile of weapons. They've actually been sparing in using some of them, and a lot of people are waiting for them to unleash their biggest loads yet. But in the time, it's crazy.
You know, it just actually, just thinking about Iran a little bit more, is, well, the other actor in Iran is Iranian people who
Yes.
overwhelmingly hate this regime, who have seen just several weeks ago thousands, if not tens of thousands, people massacred in the streets by this regime. They are not coming out because bombs are flying. Tom Friedman has got this good line about the Middle East, that it's not important what the day after something ends. What's important is the day after the day after. And that comes to mind, you maybe want this to stop the kinetic side of this, to give the Iranian society a chance to assert itself. But maybe the regime is also thinking this way, and actually we want to, a bit like Vladimir Putin in Russia, war is very convenient for keeping, your society under very tight authoritarian control.
They're basically willing to stop at nothing now in terms of what they'll do to their own population. Apparently, in tower blocks, of which there are many in Iran, where people have been heard to shout, death to fill in the blanks, death to now Mushtaba, they've apparently informed the people who live there that if such shouts continue to emanate from the tower block, then we're going to start going after the whole building. I don't think there's ever going to be a return. There have been times where there have been reformists. There have been times when it's like, well, we'll let up a little bit on this. There's no turning back as long as this regime exists on controls over the population, what they're allowed to say, speak, and so on. It's only going to get tighter. It's,
The Iranian inside Iran, I've been told from a friend of mine who I was having coffee last week in DC when all this started and the strike started, they are saying, it's okay. We will die, but we want to get rid of this regime. Imagine how they reached to this point. They can no longer take this dictatorship and the rule of wilayat al-faqih over them. So they are fine. Okay, we're going to be maybe casualties of war, but we want to be done with this regime. So the people of Iran are suffering from the regime, and they are suffering now, and they are the ones who are suffering the most in all that.
Yeah, I think it's also worth remembering the sort of politics on this side of the battle line in Jerusalem, since this is really a joint Israeli-American operation, and in the U.S. For Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, this is pretty important. It's the realization of 40 years of something he's wanted to do his entire career. He's also under some pressure at home. He's got some legal cases. He may also want the war to continue. No, Leila?
Of course he wants the war to continue. He's expanding now boots on the ground in Lebanon. So yes, he wants the war to continue because he wants to stay. And honestly, Matt, I think the winner in this war in the short term is Bibi.
Yeah. I think that seems to me, of course, because Bibi's shown that the most powerful country in the world has joined arm in arm with Israel. And again, America was always Israel's ally, but it's also been an ally that was the senior partner, clearly, and was willing to criticize and to push back when it was necessary to do so. I think the really interesting question will be in Washington, because I think President Trump is thinking about his legacy, and following the Abraham Accords, one of his biggest successes in foreign policy at the end of his first term, he's looking at the region and thinking, well, I really do want to leave a different kind of region behind than I found. And Iran's been a nagging problem for the U.S. since the late 1970s. It is time to do something about it. And if you can fix Iran, you can open up many possibilities in the region as a whole. But, and this is a huge but, he ran on promises to stay out of the Middle East conflicts.
Yeah.
He is hugely critical. I mean, there's few politicians that he doesn't like more than George W. Bush and what happened in Iraq. His vice president is even more committed to keeping American troops off the ground, certainly, and out of harm's way. And the longer this continues, I think and by the way, there was never a case really made to American public that we are going to war. So you're seeing in the polls that it's not so popular. And lastly, you're going to see the gasoline prices are already inching up. They're going to get up higher. People they don't understand why this is happening, and they're not going to like it. So I think it'll be really interesting to watch Washington and to see how this president, who's had, huge success in Venezuela, had that initial success in Iran, how he tries to close things up, because the assumption was always, and he was very clear, this won't last long, and we'll go, and we really can take care of business very quickly.
Domestically, Trump is facing a lot of backlashes, economic risk, and declining public support, as you put it. So legacy versus, you cannot get a legacy if you're not being supported domestically. So domestically, there is a very big challenge for President Trump now, especially if this war became longer and longer, and it's gonna have a huge impact. On everybody.
I mean, look at the European countries as well. They're going to have to really make some hard choices. They're really going to have to get involved or not. And, we're going to take up energy prices, I think, next. Everybody's going to be affected. You have a bunch of elections that are coming up in the next year, not just in the US, midterms and so on. World leaders are going to have to take a stand. They're going to have to explain to their public, just as in the past they've had to explain their stance on Russia's aggression against Ukraine. This is forcing a lot of people in a lot of countries to make political choices.
Because the war is not only in weapons, it's in the market.
Yep.
So this is where the war shifted to the market.
Matt, you mentioned
gas. I spent some time yesterday. Yeah. No, gas too. I mean, this has been, both the short term, there's a whole other conversation about energy, which, to be fair, before this started, we saw the buildup in the region. We saw that, the U.S. moved a lot of refueling planes. I was in Dubai. It seems like ages ago, but it was really only 2.5 weeks ago. And the assumption there was, this is going to happen. This is definitely going to get kinetic. We are bracing for it, but we think it'll be short term. And I did not have a serious conversation about, and I don't think anyone thought seriously that we're going to have the biggest energy crisis since 1973. And that is what is playing out now. And if you look at, just look at the numbers of how much of the global demand is supplied by the Gulf, that yes, there are strategic reserves. The International Energy Agency yesterday called for its members, which is most of the developed world, to release about 400 million barrels. But there isn't enough to make up for what is now not getting to market, because you cannot get this stuff out of the Gulf now very easily, because it all has to pass, most of it has to pass through the Straits of Hormuz, which are super narrow. And there aren't very good options to protect the ships, and there aren't very good options to stop, drones flying or people in small boats sabotaging or laying mines. So that is really, in short term, the oil business is a very simple business. You got to get it out of the ground and you got to get it to market. We are now seeing the getting it to market, creating very predictable supply shocks.
And then you have the economy, right? Because it's inevitably going to result in some inflationary developments as well. And
for sure, because that's a big part of, it's such a huge cost for the economy. The other interesting thing about what's happening in energy is that this is going to be a big hit to natural gas producers. 2026 was supposed to be the first year of this decade where you would have full and predictable supply of natural gas. Qatar had to close its LNG or say that its deliveries of LNG were being suspended because Iran had hit it, and that causes, the U.S. is now self-sufficient in energy, unlike in 1973, but Europe is not. And that creates really some tough decisions here in Europe, where I am today, about who do you make a deal with, America or Russia on it. So really, short term, the energy crunch is really a far bigger deal than I think anyone imagined it to be.
Andres and Matt, I want to just remind everybody why the Strait of Hormuz is like this big ogre for everybody. So it goes back for more than 50 years, where strategists remember that what began in 1973, the oil shock during the Yom Kippur War. Arab oil producing states cut oil supplies to Western countries to punish them for supporting Israel. That happened back then. Became the crisis. And the second time it was Iran who did that. The second shock was in 1978 and 1979 because it was caused by the Iranian Revolution. So
Yeah.
this is another oil shock. So they have this phobia because the Strait of Hormuz, it's not the first time that creates such kind of crisis. And they know the consequences of the closing down of Strait of Hormuz.
And it's so hard. It's so hard to get through it too. I mean, I remember Jim Stavridis, who's was the supreme commander in Europe for the U.S., Admiral Stavridis. He was saying that as a ship captain, even in peacetime, that was one of the hairiest passages. It's very narrow. There's a lot of mist and poor visibility, kind of very, sort of strong currents there. He said it's very hard to pass through in the best of times. So I can imagine a lot of, you can see why insurance companies and oil tanker captains don't want to go there. I think the other thing about the energy, and this is sort of beyond our scope, is that so longer term, this is going to have huge implications of whether oil will be still as important as it is, happens to natural gas. I think coal will make a comeback in a lot of parts of the world, because this has been a reminder that this stuff is not necessarily as reliable as we've all thought it would be. The other thing this is going to do is going to really call into question for me the business political, not the political model, but actually probably the political model of the Gulf states. This is a part of the world which has been based on it's safe, it is open, allied with the U.S. They've done such a good job of, building AI companies and really talking about reform and
investing in the U.S. with the huge amount of money.
Exactly.
Yes. And now there's been talk that these investments may not carry on. There's their economic security, even they are trying. It's so fragile. And not only that, there's something everybody should pay attention to. The Gulf are living on water, so they do have the desalinated water, and they do rely on it between 70 and 90%. And in early March, already Bahrain accused Iran striking their desalination plants, and Iranian missiles, drones targeted areas near major desalination facilities in the UAE near Jabal Ali. So this is not easy. Also, not on the oil level. You cannot live without water. Gulf needs the water, and Iran knows where they are hitting. They are hitting where it really hurts. Water, oil, ports, anything that can really hurt the Gulf, because they believe that they are having this American military bases there, so they are part of because they cannot reach the US anyway. So this is
making Gaza look pretty stable and safe, So, one of the things,
and next thing, one thing we've not seen yet, by the way, we haven't seen, Iran deploy cyber. And that's something, if you're, let's say, the banking system in Dubai, is that something they're going to try and go after, with cyber attacks? These are sort of, Dubai above all, which doesn't have much energy, but it depends on being interconnected with the world and being this crossroads for people or for capital and for goods. And all those three things are now in danger.
And not only that, you look at a place like Bahrain, which has a majority Shia population ruled over by a Sunni family. And there have always been tensions simmering below the surface. And we've seen videos of people throwing rocks and being unhappy. Who knows what the issue is, but that's, that could be part of it as well. Not all of these kingdoms are sitting on stable political environments or
No, and not even
population.
economical environment. Even before the war, Saudi Arabia was expected to have a deficit about 44 billion, Qatar around 6 billion, and Kuwait could face deficit roughly 32 billion. This is before the war.
Yep.
How about the numbers gonna change drastically now after the war?
Yeah. No, you kind of got the sense that in Saudi Arabia, which has had a very, um, you know, pretty good couple of years, at least its leader, MBS, has had a pretty good
Yes,
couple of years, but last year has been quite difficult. The numbers aren't adding up. All those white elephant projects looking even
the
bigger and
2030.
whiter
Yeah,
than ever before.
yeah.
I think that Andres is so right about Bahrain. That's such a vulnerability in the Gulf, because that is so you saw it in the Arab Spring, when you have the Shia there who are tend to be the poorer members of society, the more disenfranchised. That could be something which really does create a problem soon. And by the way, you know what the greatest fear of people in the Emirates, of the rulers in the Emirates is, and partly in Saudi Arabia, the rise of political Islam. And we haven't
Already
seen,
there.
thankfully, terrorism. I think there's been some small signs that you've had attacks, that we worry about sleeper cells. But the greatest fear of people in Abu Dhabi, of the leaders of MBZ in Abu Dhabi and in the Emirates, is the return of political Islam. And you remember what happened? The Iraq War was in 2003. ISIS really
Guys,
emerged in full within a decade. That is something that I think you have to be worried about, because we've talked about drones, we've talked about mines, we've talked about cyber, but terrorism is really the ultimate asymmetric weapon, as we saw, at the beginning of this century.
yes, and adding to that, the rise of extremism in the region, in the Levant mostly, I'm not gonna say in the Gulf, started since October 7th, and now it's being taken to the other level with on Iran war, Sunni, Shia. Take, for example, Lebanon with the Hezbollah, who are a Shia. Everybody now is against them, and there is the fear of having the Syrian intervention, which is a Sunni, even though it's a country, but that's not how they see things. So the extremism, it's going to be a natural reaction to what's going on, especially on the war in Iran. And that's something very scary, and much more scarier for me as being part of the region than the actual bombs.
So who's benefiting? Somebody's winning something from this. And I just want to touch on that as well. Okay, rising oil prices. Who benefits from that? And
Russia.
exactly.
The first reaction.
Exactly. It's the first country that comes to mind. Who else is actually coming out ahead because of this war? So, political Islam may see a rise. Russia may be doing well with higher oil prices. Who else? Who else?
And they can do
is sitting there?
In a plane. Nobody is thinking about them.
Who's rubbing their hands and going, I want this to continue?
I think for China, I think they must be very ambivalent about this. There are problems shorter term for China in terms of oil supplies, but I don't know if you saw the story in the Wall Street Journal yesterday that guess whose oil exports are rising? Iran's, because their ships aren't having trouble getting through, and these shadow fleet, which is going to China, is getting through. So I'm not sure if the Chinese are going to feel it, because they're the biggest importer of Iranian oil. They're also the biggest importer of just Gulf oil. They're the biggest trading partner for the Gulf too. So China's going to feel probably some energy pinch, but maybe it won't be as great as other consumers of Gulf oil. That's a negative thing. The fall of the regime in Tehran is also a negative, because that would be the second ally to drop after Venezuela. But if it does get the U.S. bogged down in the Gulf that might create openings for China, whether it's in Asia or with Russia and Ukraine in Europe. Uh, and so I guess I wonder. I think we all assume the Chinese have much larger stakes here than just the Middle East, and this is just it's not a top priority region. There's a big summit with President Trump and Chairman Xi at the end of the month, and there's this assumption that Trump would want this to stop by then. But it's worth watching because the Chinese have been very quiet about this, partly because they can't do anything about it. But I wonder what they're really thinking, in Beijing behind the scenes.
You do wonder.
I do want to sort of. I do think it's important. I mean, I don't actually mean to be entirely. I think it's important to sort of note the potential for this going badly, and it's also probably worth dwelling a little bit on how it can turn out well. One. You have probably set back the Iranian nuclear program by years, if not more. We're certainly months more, but years. You have set back their ability to support proxy.
Yes. No, I mean, there's no reason on earth. They've been always sort of cagey. You allegedly have this fatwa saying that from the supreme leader, the dad, that this is against Islam to develop a nuclear weapon and so on. I don't see any of that henceforth. I mean, assuming that we get back to a stable situation, I don't think there's going to be any hedging of bets that well, no, we don't really mean it. No, don't worry. That's out the window, right? I mean, why even try to hide it anymore?
Well, that's the danger. Do they? Where is that enriched uranium, by the way? And can they get to breakout now if we don't if we don't pay close attention? But again, I was trying to delve on more of on a kind of not a more positive scenario. One, you've destroyed the weapons. Two, you've destroyed their missiles. Three, you've further weakened their ability to support proxies, at least in a symmetric way. You do have this asymmetrical threat, but symmetrically they can do very little. And then I think it's both reminding again the point about the day after in Iran is the idea that you would have an Iran that is not run by a bloody clerical totalitarian regime that has really suppressed the talents and energies of a ancient civilization for half a century. If that were to end, the potential here is really kind of staggering. Iran's the size of Turkey, but it has oil and gas, so it could be a much bigger economy in the region. If it's allied not with China or Russia, but with the West, even eventually, striking some kind of agreement with Israel, that opens the possibilities to a very exciting Middle East, and that's what was in the mind of President Trump on February 28th, when this all started.
Yeah, I mean,
do we still buy it? Do we still think it's possible?
Well, as somebody who's been involved with Iran it's fascinated me all my life. I always have this hope. It can be tough, 47 years, but the history is there, the potential is there. As you said, cultural civilization, not to mention natural resources. And we're all just holding our breath. And so this is the chance to kind of throw the deck of cards in the air and just hope that they all land up. Suddenly you have a royal flush coming out of it. You got to be optimistic somehow. But then how does it end? How does it end? What could this possibly look like? Let's say the leaders of the US and China get together, they don't want this to be in the headlines. Okay, so what's it going to look like? What's it going to look like? Who's going to be shooting at whom with what? What do you say, Leila?
Like I said before, I don't know. This is because it's not only one person who is, or one party who is involved, how it's going to end. Everybody has to end it together. But for me, there's no winner in this because they are short-time winners, but on the long run, you're not going to have any winners. If the regime stayed, the Iranian loses.
Yep.
If the regime changed, you might have a civil war inside Iran with all the ethnicity and who's going to take over. I don't see personally anybody who's stepping to take over. Everybody is fighting who's going to take over the IRGC. So,
what's interesting we're talking about everybody's leaders except for Iran, ultimately. Reza Pahlavi's waiting in the wings. There are lots of other people who are out there. We don't know what's going on with Mujtaba. Is he around? Is he whatever? So it is kind of interesting that in all of what's going on, we have these big, powerful international leaders, and then the one place where we really don't know what's going on, who's running the show, who are the big names, who are going to be the big names, as Matt pointed out, how many they took out in the first days of the war. Like, is it a leaderless country? And you mentioned the Iranian people, and it's good for,
I mean, I just think that sort of the range of possibilities is quite broad, and that's both gives you some cause for hope. Iran one day. I'm reminded of there's a very legendary Iranian writer named Amir Taheri who told me years ago. He said, "In the long run, Iran's going to be just fine. The problem is we don't know how long that run is." But if in the long run, a fine Iran, a normal country, integrated with the region, integrated with the world. But then the other options are, next to that option is some, not regime change, but regime modification under men in uniform with whom we can have a modus vivendi and hope that things do change, not next week, but over the coming year or the coming years. And then you get into the scary stuff, which is a regime that is as bad, if not more aggressive than the one that was just decapitated under the father Khamenei and under the son in name so far, not in real life. That is a threat to the region's stability. That is making it impossible to reopen this Strait of Hormuz. And then the worst case scenario is Iran is a failed state. And I heard Ehud Olmert, the former Israeli prime minister, the other day point out, look, in Syria, which is 1/5 the size of Iran, it began with Arab Spring, thinking this is going to maybe lead to the fall of the Assad regime. It led to the fall of the Assad regime, but it took 10 years and it cost 600,000 lives, and it led to millions of people who were displaced out of Syria. So that's the worst case scenario that we have to avoid. And whatever the policy is, has to get us on this side of the ledger. I just want to just say the thing about how this ends is that it takes one person to start a war. It takes many people to end a war. And that is why wars are easier to start than to end.
Just like podcasts.
Here we go. We come to an end.
Sign us out, Andres.
Thank you, both of you, for your time, your insights. You really gave me a lot of stuff to think about. For our audiences, we do have multiple products coming out of Middle East Broadcasting Networks. One of them is the Iran newsletter. Feel free to sign up. You'll see the link in the podcast at the end. Please do sign up for the Iran briefing and for the other newsletters and products that come out of Middle East Broadcasting. So signing off, thanking you, Matt Kaminsky, our editorial chair, Leila Bazi, our editor-in-chief, and from myself, the Iran editor of MBN. Have a good day and just stay tuned.